I don't know about you, but I only trust the best. So if you're looking at getting your roof checked out, redone, these are the guys that can help you. Belter Roofing and Construction, they are the best. They'll come out, do a free inspection. You can trust them with your roof. Call them, Belter Roofing and Construction. 405-952-7777. That's Belter Roofing and Construction.
This is the Jake for the State podcast, and this is the call for every red-blooded, God-fearing, liberty-loving patriot to prepare yourself, take your position, stand your ground, and advance the cause of freedom. Let's go.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Jake for the State podcast. It is election season, as I say a lot recently, interviewing a lot of candidates. Today is not a candidate, but someone who is interested and engaged in this whole campaign process and coming with a lot of experience and expertise in the issue because he actually termed out in the House, serving 12 years and was part of that pioneering class that led to the Republican supermajority that we currently have in the state. So I want you to welcome to the show former Representative Jason Murphey. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for the invitation.
You bet. You bet. Well, you know, again, thanking you publicly because you jumped in and helped me in my race. Because I jumped in as a grassroots candidate, coming in wet behind the ears with no prior political experience, just someone with strong convictions. And we're seeing more and more, I think, of those across the state, people that are just saying, you know, we want to be represented, we want our voices being heard. I don't see it being done, so I'm going to step up and run. That's kind of where I was at, and did not have a consultant. So it was because of people like you, other volunteers who also stepped in and surrounded me with suggestions and wisdom that helped me navigate the choppy waters of the political system in the campaign season and eventually got elected. But I want to dive into that a little bit later, talking about the grassroots movement here in Oklahoma, and I think we're seeing across the nation. But first, I'd like to hear from you about your experience when you first got into this whole political process back in the day when the Democrats ruled the day. So tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I think it was you were briefing me on this before the show in 2004 when the state had this shift. Tell us about that, and then what happened when you were elected in 2006.
I think I volunteered for my first state level campaign in the year 2000. And at that time, of course, we were 4 years away from having a majority in any chamber, and it had been Democrat-dominated all chambers since 1922. And we were very driven with that same spirit that you described of you and today's grassroots activists turned candidates, people that want to make a difference for the right reason. We were the same, only we could point to a very defining characteristic of those of us who were mostly grassroots, and that was that we were the Republicans. So you knew who the grassroots were because it was the minority party, and very often an individual who just wants power, he goes to the majority party. And so it was very easy for us to set a vision as volunteers and as candidates at that time and work to implement that and to really send a message that if Republicans were elected, years of corruption and inefficiency would be addressed, mitigated, and we would do the right thing for the voters. And so that was a reason that really motivated us and gave us reason to volunteer our time and energy.
Man, I'm just thinking about being in the minority party. Not only is that hard to imagine in this day in Oklahoma, where every county in Oklahoma voted for Trump, but putting myself in your shoes, Jason, as the minority party, and now on this side of things, seeing that we're a Republican supermajority, how does that change the way you face obstacles, political hurdles? Because you overcame one of the biggest hurdles in the state history of this complete shift in party dominance. Was there ever a feeling back in the day that we would never have an actual voice in Oklahoma? That could you ever imagine having a supermajority in the state back in the day whenever you were the minority party?
Oh, yes. There was a real sense of the inevitability of the whole thing. Yet all through the 90s, really, I'm assuming probably the 80s too, once the Reagan era was underway, there was obviously a strong sense that the hurdles of the Nixon era had been passed by. The downturn in the 80s, the financial downturn in the 80s, I think had really hurt the Democrats' ability to convey a good policy message when they raised the taxes. And so there was a total sense of inevitability of reaching the promised land. It was just a matter of how soon we could get there. And that really provided an enthusiasm and a motivating factor. As in the Clinton era, there was no doubt at that point in time that it was just a matter of time before there would be a change, and maybe could have predicted supermajority status as well. I think that would be a few years beyond that, but it was clearly a matter of time. The state was going to change, and for several years you had the strangest dynamic in Oklahoma, where the urban areas were Republican, the rural areas were Democrat. And so there was just so much room to grow as the rural areas switched and as Oklahoma, modeled what was already present on the national level to some extent. So, yep, we knew it was going to happen. It was a matter of time. And I think a lot of us were really focused on, once we got there, what we would do. I mean, I was probably very naive at the time, but I was a real true believer in that mission. And that really drove and motivated us.
I still come across people in the state that, you ask them about the Republican Democrat, and still come across some old timers who identify as yellow dog Democrat, blue dog Democrat, however they want to identify, of the old flavor of Democrat, which, in today's day, it seems like it more aligns with what would be more of a moderate Republican. And so I'm just thinking about the re-identification of these parties in general, the crazy woke progressive movement in the Democrat Party. And then on the Republican side, you have this constant battle between quote unquote rhinos and the establishment, this constant name calling about who's the true Republican and who's truly a conservative. So again, curious about your position, your perspective on this, about when you look at the Republican Party specifically, have you seen it morph and change since back in the day, 2004, late 90s time?
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt, in good and bad ways. That as those rural Democrats have yielded to the next generation of rural Republicans, they bring a lot to the party that party will benefit from and does benefit from. I would say that today's Republican climate, for example, is much more conducive to Second Amendment legislation than it was when I was there in the early years. You've seen a lot of progress, and that's due to groups like OK2A really working it hard. But there's an openness there now that wasn't necessarily present back then. And I attribute that maybe to the fact that you have that new rural involvement that maybe wasn't in the group in the early days of the majority. But then in so many other ways, the corruption of being in power, of having unchecked power, especially in terms of legislative process and transparency, all of that, those days are long gone. This second generation is absolutely clueless, especially in the House. Is absolutely clueless about the principles of what good governance looks like, what efficiency looks like. Does efficiency even matter anymore? They're swimming in so much money in the inflation and the post-COVID era that it's unrecognizable. There's just no sense of purpose, mission, ability to goal set, to translate action in the legislative arena into results, communicate those results, benchmark progress. And so when those legislators are going back to their constituents to get reelected, you won't see them in any way really able to point to a goal that they set, a goal that they achieved, a benchmark, a new efficiency, new transparencies, because frankly, there really don't appear to be any. And I think that has destroyed the culture of those Republicans in the legislature. And it's simply because I think the dark money, which means that more of those representatives now represent special interest and powerful institutions and government bureaucracies than they do the values of the people. And then two, just general arrogance of power, in that for the most part, an Oklahoma Republican legislator is drafting on the Oklahoman sentiment as it relates to national level politics. And so a Republican in a Republican or even a marginal district is probably going to get elected no matter what. They don't have to worry about a Democrat challenger saying, why did you exempt this process, or why are you spending this much money? And frankly, the Democrats are horrible at being the minority and holding the Republicans accountable anyways. And so that leads to only the grassroots candidates who challenge Republicans, usually in Republican districts and Republican closed primaries, to be the accountability partner for the legislators. And because of the dark money that comes in, that challenge is only as good as are the logistical abilities of those grassroots candidates. And normally they do not know the methods, nor do they have the means for providing that credible challenge. And that's why we, as those who believe in the cause of small government, efficiency, transparency, we have to step up, volunteer, share that knowledge, and help those candidates know how to define these so the voters will understand it, how to define these challenges, because once the voters get it, they'll see what's going on. And then two, help them with the methods by which to communicate that message. And if all of that comes together, if the voters understand what really is at stake and what is going on, the Republican primary voter in large is going to be with that grassroots candidate. They're going to be horrified to know what's really going on. And that's why we need more and more candidates, especially those who think they might run next time. The time to start getting involved for 2026 is now. And normally you need to be ready to go a year out and ready to hold that incumbent co-opted legislator accountable.
So I want to come back to present day in just a minute to talk about that influence of dark money and talk about the dynamics of the legislators, with the failure to make and achieve goals and benchmarks, all those things that you mentioned. First, let's contrast that. Let's rewind and talk about back in the day again, starting with campaign season and the influence of dark money. Was this part of the conversation ever, this idea of dark money back when you were running in the early 2000s?
No, not at all. There was PAC money and there was special interest involvement from, always. But it wasn't so that there were the opportunities for, a house race to drop, see a $50,000 dark money drop. And that type of abuse or mega money, we didn't have to deal with that so much back in the day. You had PACs and you had dastardly politics at all levels, but the size of the attacks and the size of the expenditures was just so much smaller.
How has that changed the game?
It's obviously added a deceptive element to the mix, right? So when a dark money group drops because they're not identified, they can attack a candidate from any angle they want. And so in 2018, dark money worked with co-opted Republican sitting legislators to purge the conservatives. And that's one of the foremost reasons why that chamber has lost its way and no longer really represents the values of the people, but more the wishes and the interest of the institutions. But that was accomplished with dark money. And I think, as I understand and have analyzed what occurred, that dark money could attack a conservative incumbent from the right. They're not a conservative, they voted for. And out of the 1,000 votes, they can find credible votes by which a conservative voted in a way that they probably shouldn't have. And they know the issues. And then, of course, you had the candidates actually being challenged. Their opponent was from the left and was courting the institutions of power to elect them. And, of course, would subsequently, more likely than not, represent those institutions of power. But what that dark money attack did is it could attack the incumbent on the incumbent's votes and positions that their challenger also would absolutely hold and follow, even though they weren't the best votes and positions. But that puts that conservative challenger in a vice. An anonymous group is attacking on one end, and no one knows. I mean, you can figure it out, but no, the average voter has no clue who's behind that post office box or that UPS store box that disguises that identity, or what the motivation is, or what their desired outcome is, even in a policy sense. They can't go to a website and see, for instance, this is the Oklahoma Medical Association, and here are their policies, here's what they want. Because maybe the medical association, is behind a dark money group called super conservatives for really good conservative things, and you should vote against this candidate because they're not always a super conservative. Well, that candidate's far more conservative than their rhino challenger, right? So, and obviously, that dark money group isn't trying to elect conservatives. But that's the element it adds. It adds an element of deception, of skullduggery, and then it's backed by just unbelievable amounts of money. That money doesn't come into play because good policy outcomes are desired necessarily. It comes into play because there's a special benefit to the dark money assassinating the character of someone that maybe didn't go along with them on a policy, but it's not a policy that they're going to debate or disclose as part of their dark money hit, because the values of the people, the real motivating policy that's leading to the dark money hit, could never be communicated to the people, because the people would be with the conservative candidate who took a courageous stand on it.
Yeah, you mentioned the American Medical Association, as we were on the other side of the climax of COVID. I was among those in the Senate that were targeted, Senate and House, that were targeted by the Medical Association. I can't remember if it was the American Medical Association, but obviously a lot of dark money mailers sent out demonizing all of these conservatives. And I remember that we had a meeting in caucus where everybody brought their mailers and saying, "What's this? And who in here is behind it?" And of course, everybody in the room denied it. Nobody would ever affiliate with that kind of attack. But many conservatives in both the House and the Senate just a couple of years ago experienced the wrath of a large organization like the Medical Association because we would not stand behind mandated vaccinations, which is a conservative position. We want to stand by individual freedom. But because we wouldn't stand behind mandated vaccinations, we were targeted. And many of those were eventually, we lost. And I was among them. And so you are completely right. I can testify as one on the other receiving end of that dark money attack. But I was among several others, that good conservatives who were ousted out because, they just didn't fall in line with an agenda. And so, man, we're seeing, obviously, Governor Stitt has spoken out about this as well. It's becoming more and more in the mainstream conversation, the influence of dark money on our campaigns and our elections. Very concerning. How do grassroots candidates overcome this? We're dealing with a kind of lethargic, apathetic, uninformed general public. So, and that's, I believe, who this dark money appeals to, sending out mass mailers and advertisements. But is there a way out? Is there a way above this for grassroots candidates?
There are two ways. First is relationship building, which in a low turnout primary environment is very doable if you have time. And because the candidate can reach the voter and build a relationship with them before the dark money hits. And if that relationship is in place, the voter will tend to trust that candidate before the anonymous dark money. If we were to measure, let's go back to 2022, and let's say that the outcome of the race was to be determined not by votes, but by dollars spent per vote. You would become very encouraged because many grassroots candidates would have spent a fraction of what their establishment opposition and the dark money forces combined spent, right? They would
Right.
have won that race going away. And so my observation has been that generally the Republican primary audience is becoming more and more skeptical of dark money. It is evolving in a good way, but that the candidate must have that relationship with the voter in order to immunize him or herself from the dark money. Those dark money attacks are becoming templated. They're using the same system this year that they did 2 years ago, and they're becoming predictable. They're weak. I think they're getting lazy. They think they've got it all lawyered up and nice and legal, but I do think violations are being overlooked and creeping in. It's something that the board, if you are on the board of an organization and you are aware that your organization is conducting a dark money attack, you need to know, one, it's becoming less and less effective. You are wasting your money more and more. And two, it's becoming sloppier and sloppier. And that someday there could easily be a day of reckoning when an adult authority in a position of leadership, whether it be a DA, an AG, even federal officials say, this insanity, I'm going to be courageous and we're going to do something. And so it's not worth the risk that they're taking. Our candidates, the good candidates, the grassroots, need to have those relationships to overcome it. And then two, they have to define themselves in a way that clearly makes it hard to attack them. And so earlier I talked about the strategy by which conservative candidates are sandwiched from the left and the right, the dark money from the right and the opposition candidate from the left. That was their formula for several years. That's what's broken the institution of the House and killed its culture. But I think that if that conservative candidate can define themselves in a way that tells everyone, I'm at a higher standard and I'm going to make a sacrifice to serve. It's not going to be about my own personal enrichment or reputation. I'm going to sacrifice. Then that they have even more benefit of the doubt when the dark money attacks. And the very best way to do that is, of course, to take the pledge that I'm not taking lobbyist or PAC money. Because once that pledge is taken, that candidate becomes an oddity, someone who's returning to the day when it was truly about service and not about a political career and not about building a war chest that will get them to the next level of politics, but taking a pledge that has to keep them close to the people, because the only way they will stay in office is by continuing to maintain those relationships. And so when that concept is explained as part of the relationship building process I mentioned earlier, then that candidate becomes so immunized against those dark money attacks. Because now not only does the voter have a relationship with them, but they have a reason to believe in them. And it's a pure reason. They're practicing abstinence from the appearance of impropriety. And if they have that as a defense and they have taken the time to build the relationships, we're going to see more and more grassroots candidates surviving the dark money attack. And if enough of them do it, the adults in the room on the boards of those organizations that are letting the hotheads do the dark money, they'll start to rein them in. And I think we'll see those things ebb out a little bit, just because they will be seen for what they are. And eventually those organizations are going to become known and associated with those dark money attacks. And the adults in the room, I think, will rein them in. So I'm generally optimistic, but it's all about having those people who are willing to step up, take that pledge, spend months of time building relationships, and doing it for the right reason, not for their own political career, not for their own reputation, understanding it's a sacrifice that they're going to experience a lot of trauma because of, but doing it because they believe in the American concept and they believe that this is the best state in the union to fulfill the American concept, and that if we could just have, it doesn't take a lot, a majority of the Republican caucus in the House, you can do the math, and it's not a lot of people, and it's definitely doable, but it has to take people stepping up well ahead of filing day to carry out that project. And that's why people have to think about 2026 now.
You know, it's just going to require a little more effort and work on the part of the grassroots, because it's easy when you have the money to send out mailers, to put on a TV ad, a radio ad, and not have to walk door to door to door to door to door, meeting the people, spending the time, getting to know them, building the relationships, which is the heart of it. That's what I enjoyed the most. I enjoyed the most meeting people, hearing from them, but it does take a lot of effort, a lot of work. It becomes another full-time job. And so I think it's a good alert to all of those would-be candidates that, hey, if you want to come in here and turn the tide and see a shift in Oklahoma, then you got to put in the work. Jason, I'm curious, do you think that this influx of dark money and these huge war chests of money that are helping these establishment candidates stay in office, is it one of the contributing factors that is doing away with debate? I don't know how much you, back in the day, sat down and debated with your opponent during some of these these state races and local races, but I don't see much of that anymore. I see, it seems like the incumbent puts out mailers, send out 50 of them, and the grassroots candidate is over here working, knocking doors, but I don't see them sitting in the same room having a debate, discussing the issues so that people could hear from both of them and decide which one's the better candidate. And I'm just curious, I feel like dark money is contributing to this, kind of making the incumbent lazy. What do you think about that?
There are multiple factors for that. I do agree. Laziness, generally speaking, does grow out of the dark money. But generally, an incumbent who has a war chest, who isn't afraid of his reelection, he isn't in fear for that because he doesn't have a grassroots challenger. And he obviously knows in the general a Democrat can't beat him. That person is incentivized to go to Oklahoma City, live the lifestyle of a C-list power broker, and do the nightlife, associate with the lobbyist, go to work in the Capitol building and hit a green button, maybe ask a question or two. But other than that, there isn't incentive for that person to read the bills, to even take the time to read the bills. The incentive isn't there. The incentive is to not cause waves, hit the green button, and then depend on special interest funding to ensure that person's reelection. And in that person's mind, it's hopefully by building a war chest so large that it discourages the incumbent, a challenger, from running against him in the first place. Because at that point in time, there's a large bit of annoyance at just having to campaign. And so most legislators around filing day get very preoccupied with whether or not they have a challenger and whether or not, they have to spend some of that war chest down and raise it again. But that whole dynamic really puts the special interest in charge, because the war chest is the security blanket, which in the lawmaker's eyes, he probably never envisions a day he could lose election. But he can envision a day when he would actually have to report back to his employer, the people, as opposed to the lobbyists who are actually financing the campaign. And the legislator dreads that day, just having to do it, generally speaking. He's under no illusion that he will be beat. He'll spend the money to win, but he doesn't want to spend the money. He wants to keep the security blanket. And so that's really the mindset that leads a legislator to yield the power of his chamber to leadership, let leadership make the hard decisions behind closed doors where there's no transparency and no accountability. And that means you will see most lawmakers hit the green button between 90 and 95% of the time. You will see very few no votes once a bill hits the floor, because the whole system is designed to punish those who would vote no too often, and certainly who would debate or ask too many questions too often. And so if you observe the process, today's culture in the House, the process is essentially one of hitting green buttons. It's a job that a monkey could do. It's not hard. And when a legislator says how hard their job is, in reality, it's a job of hitting a green button, unless they are one of the conscientious types who are there for the right reason. And then it becomes a much more challenging job, albeit for all of the right reasons, and that's very rewarding.
So much there. So it's good stuff. You mentioned a few minutes ago, Jason, the culture that had been killed, which implies that it was once alive. And so what culture was alive that you were a part of that has been killed today?
So as Republicans came to control in the House, they would work to craft a conservative platform. And at the start of the session, they would have a press conference, and many of the Republican legislators would be there, and the House Speaker would say, okay, here are our goals, here are our beliefs, here's what we're doing. And then at the end of session, they would do that, and they would point to those goals. And very often there were conservative goals to gain. And over the years, there was recognition that we had to show progress to those people that believed in the fact that there was the Republicans who were defending the American concept of limited government, and you can fill in all the blanks from there. But we had a process for doing that, and there could be a discussion about what that should look like, but at the end of the year, we knew we had to have results. And I couldn't tell you when the last time you had a Republican caucus set a conservative outcome result and then come back at the end of the year and say, okay, we achieved that result. Certainly not on the logistical matters that aren't exciting, but perhaps are some of the most important as to, did we downsize the size of government? Did we realize new efficiencies? Did we add new transparencies? That just doesn't happen, because it can't happen, because the money spending in the last 4 or 5 years in the inflation and the COVID era has made it so that it's impossible to keep track of the many inefficiencies that are building into the system. And in that sense, there's really just not that culture. There's nothing that's driving this current generation, I don't think.
You know, so many times we get lost in the conversation on individual issues. And especially when the legislative session is in full swing, we're talking about issue after issue after issue. And I believe this is probably a more important conversation we have to get back to, is the culture. And what does it mean to be a Republican and a conservative? And how are we seeing those ideals and principles implemented into the process and driving these bills that we're talking about? So, you know, how do we get, we mentioned it before, we got to get the right people in there. Because I was going to ask the question, how do we get back to that? How do we restore that culture? And maybe I answered my own question, is we got to get the right people back in there who are committed to these causes. Would you add anything to that?
It's happening. The equilibrium is returning as the dark money has jumped the shark. It's an old strategy. It's not going to be as effective. The institutions that engage to elect and destroy the culture of the Republican caucus have largely disengaged to some extent. And you will see this year those elected by those institutions in 2018 trying to keep their jobs on a platform of 100% pure conservatism. Now, that's a very deceptive technique they're using, but what it shows is that they cannot rely on the institutions anymore, and they have to at least pretend and have their consultants structure a message that says, I represent the people. And that's a very good sign, because it means that they're finally getting the message and they're recognizing it. And that's only possible because, especially this year, so many grassroots candidates are stepping up to do that challenge. Now, many of them probably waited too long to do that, which is why I keep emphasizing 2026. In 2026, we have 2 years to do this, and candidates can get involved much earlier. And that could be the year that turns the tide. But I definitely think this will be the year that you will see the trend line change, in that next year's House will be more representative of the people than the institutions than were the previous 3 or 4. And that will be because you will have some new conservative voices representing the people, and then you will have some of the co-opted powers out of sheer fear and fright say, you know what, maybe that bill I was going to sponsor that brought about the surveillance state to Oklahoma, that might not be a good idea this time. And that's only because conservative challengers have picked up on these issues, they're running on them, And we're seeing more and more of that. So again, generally optimistic, but there's a tremendous calling for people who don't desire a political career, who desire to save the best state in the greatest republic in the history of the world at tremendous personal sacrifice to themselves, to step up, adopt a district, make it their own, and allow those of us who have some of this knowledge to help them do what they need to do and keep this momentum going. And I'm very optimistic that that can and will happen.
It's so encouraging, Jason, and I hope the people listening are encouraged and motivated to get on board with this big shift happening in the state. You mentioned on the radio show, the last interview, talking about one of the hallmarks of the true conservative today would be their firm stance to not receive any money from lobbyist PACs, special interest groups, and that you anticipate this becoming the norm, and the indicator of a true conservative is that they refuse to take that money. Tell me more about that and how you anticipate that impacting the culture of our legislature.
I spoke a minute ago about how that is an amazing tool for defining the candidate as they seek office, that they can say, hey, I'm going to work harder for your vote. I'm going to show that I understand our principles and values, certainly unlike any other. But most importantly, here's why I won't betray those values after I'm elected. Because the average voter knows the number one reason that they're probably disappointed in their representative is because when that representative takes a bad vote, the voter thinks in their mind, why in the world would he take that vote? That is ridiculous. And what the voter will suspect is someone else has gotten to him, because none of my neighbors, my friends, my community feels the way he does. So why? And it's being able as the candidate to communicate that allows the candidate to survive the dark money attack. And that message is worth thousands of dollars. It evens out the race in so many ways. I would take a grassroots candidate who takes that pledge and has a $10,000 budget over a co-opted incumbent with bad votes who doesn't take the pledge and takes a lot of lobbyist money and has a $50,000 budget any day, provided the grassroots will work hard. But if enough candidates do that, and we have double-digit candidates doing that this year, a few might win. Others might be back next year. If they keep at it, eventually a majority of them will win. It's only a matter of time because the people believe it. And when you start to have 5, 6, 7, 8 members of the House holding office on that platform, and you see their votes, and you see the difference they're going to make, then it's going to be a matter for the people in the other districts, because the message will get out, and they'll start asking their lawmaker, why do you take lobbyist money? And their lawmaker will defend it. They'll try to explain it away, and that is the strategic error. We're seeing that now in some districts, where the lawmaker makes the horrible strategic error of saying, I'm going to explain why lobbyists are great because they educate me, without an average constituent thinking, well, can't they educate you without giving you thousands of dollars and taking you out dining at $100 and some tabs every so often, because that's just common sense. But the gist of it is constituents all across the state will begin asking that question. And that is what the old guard incumbent fears, that he's going to have to answer that, because there is no good answer to that question. If 7 or 8 or even 1 or 2 like now can show that, 1, they can hold office, 2, they can represent the values of their people, and 3, they can not participate, they'll practice abstinence from the appearance of special conflict, then every legislator should be able to do it. And why is my district not represented by someone who's willing to do that? I think my district is great. We deserve to have someone that has that pledge. If another district does and another community does, why can't my community? And that will begin to seep in every district statewide of both parties. And that's a day that you will see that culture change. And I can point to that because you can look at those 2 representatives who practice that policy now, Rick West and Tom Gann, and just watch any given day at the House and notice who the no votes are. Those 2 are not 90 to 95% yes votes. They're not voting yes as a matter of habit. Clearly, they're reading the bills. They're deciding on the policy. They'll vote yes sometimes, but it might be 50-50. I'm not sure. Part of the project I've launched, oklahomastatecapital.com, we're going to publish those numbers at the end of the year. So we'll be able to see that graph, that you'll see that bar chart, Tom Gann, Rick West, the two that don't take lobbyists' money, and you'll see that red bar and that green bar, and they will not be far apart. And then take about just any other lawmaker of either party, and you will have a tower of green. And it will be that graph that can be carried out through the whole state and shows what a difference makes when a lawmaker says, I'm going to avoid the conflict of interest, and I'm just going to vote my district and the values of those who elected me, and my campaign platform that I ran on, my contract with the voter. I'm going to uphold that, keep my word. And we'll be able to illustrate that. We just need the people who believe in this vision to say, I'm going to give up a year of my life, and I'm going to open myself up to all kinds of trauma, but we're going to get it done. We want to save this country. We want to save the greatest state in this country, and it's only a matter of time.
Man, it's so good. And again, so encouraging and so simple. It's a simple step in the right direction. Everyone out there listening, you can call your state legislature, your rep, your senator, and say, do you take PAC, lobbyist, or special interest money? And would you commit to not taking that in the future? Why or why not? And ask the same question of the candidate when they come to your door. It's a simple question, a quick litmus test. Do you commit to not taking PAC, lobbyist, or special interest money, and letting that be the indicator of the true conservative, of the one that's really committed to representing the people, or can they be bought out? So I love it. I love it. I think this is a great strategy to make a shift here in Oklahoma. And so I think we all need to get on board. I mean, we're getting this podcast out to more and more people. It's growing every single day, getting across the state. So I hope that you're hearing this message loud and clear and using this as a way to gauge who you're going to vote for in the next election or reelect in the next election. So again, Jason, I appreciate you and your time. I appreciate the pioneering work that you did with all the other legislators back in the day that led to the Republican supermajority we have here. I mean, we got to do this again so we can talk more about this culture shift, some of the dynamics we're seeing in the legislature. And even I want to get into some of the discussion about the consultants and the influence of consultants on our campaigns. So there's so much more we can talk about, but I think that's so good what we talked about today and how we can help make this shift in Oklahoma. So thanks again, Jason.
Yeah, absolutely. I've enjoyed it.
You bet. Well, Jason Murphey, former Oklahoma House rep, and I appreciate all you guys listening out there. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, of course, to get this kind of content out there to more people, because I believe really this is how we make a shift in Oklahoma. So be sure to share. And of course, whenever you subscribe, then you get a notice. Whenever we have great interviews like this popping up, you'll get a notice. So again, thanks for tuning in to the Jake for the State podcast. We'll do it again next time.